Even are you?
Her sobs shook the walls. Not metaphorically. Not poetically. The walls of the parsonage bedroom literally trembled with the weight of what she was trying to contain. 4 years of silence finally refusing to be silent. 4 years of swallowed screams choosing this particular night to come up all at once like something that had been buried alive and had finally clawed its way out. Her sobs shook the walls. And nobody heard them. Because outside those walls, 6,000 voices were swallowing the sound whole. Pastor! 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 The chant rose like a flood. Climbed the stairs. Pushed under the door. It pressed against Miriam where she sat crumpled on the edge of the bed in her cream-colored dress. The dress she had ironed for 2 hours that morning because Daniel said it had to be perfect. It always had to be perfect. Everything had to be perfect except the man himself. And the chanting felt less like worship and more like a verdict. Pastor! 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 6,000 voices celebrating a man she no longer recognized. 6,000 voices calling him holy. Miriam pressed both hands over her mouth so hard she could feel her teeth against her palms, and she rocked forward, and the tears ran hot and silent down her wrists, and she looked at the ceiling. That same ceiling she had looked at so many nights in this bed in this house in this life. And she whispered the prayer that had been living in her chest for so long it had worn a groove. Lord! How can he preach holiness to the world when our home is burning? The bedroom door was thick. Mahogany. Daniel had chosen it specifically because it muffled sound, and she had never fully understood why until the first year of their marriage, when she realized the door wasn't there to give her privacy. It was there to contain her. Downstairs, she heard the click of his dress shoes on the tile, the deliberate measured pace of a man who owned every room he walked into. She heard the sound of a mirror being consulted, the uncapping of cologne, the clearing of a throat. She stood from the bed, walked to the mirror on her side of the room, and watched herself wipe her eyes with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times. Foundation over the puffiness. Powder over the evidence. Lipstick pressed into a curve that the mouth had forgotten how to mean. She looked at herself for a long moment. Who are you? She thought. When did you disappear? There was a soft knock at the door. Miriam. His voice was calm. Pleasantly calm. The voice he used when the performance was about to begin. They're waiting. She smoothed her dress. Touched the pearl earrings he had given her on their 3rd anniversary. The same night he told her she was lucky any man had married her at all. I'm coming, she said. She opened the door. Pastor Daniel Adeyemi stood in the hallway in a charcoal suit that fit him like authority. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaved, cologne-drenched, with eyes that could make any congregation feel like the most beloved people on earth. He was handsome in the way that made women in the church whisper that he must have been carved by angels. His teeth were perfect. His posture was perfect. His Bible was tucked under his arm like a scepter. He looked at her once, a quick clinical sweep, and nodded. Fix your collar, he said, and walked away. She reached up. Her collar was fine. Had always been fine. She followed him down the stairs anyway. And as she descended, step by step, behind the man the world was chanting for, she noticed something that stopped her cold on the 3rd step from the bottom. His collar. She had spent 40 minutes on his shirt that morning. She knew that shirt the way you know things you have tended to obsessively, out of fear rather than love. She knew it was white. She knew it was pressed. She knew it was spotless when she hung it in his closet at 7 a.m. There was a mark on it now. Faint. Half hidden by the fold of the collar. A half-moon of coral-colored lipstick that had not been there this morning. He didn't know she saw it. He was already at the bottom of the stairs, adjusting his cufflinks, already becoming the man the crowd was waiting for. He wiped the lipstick from his collar with his thumb, straightened his tie, stepped into the pulpit with a smile that heaven had never seen. Redemption Cathedral sat on 3 acres of prime land in the center of the city, and on Sunday mornings, it looked like the gates of heaven itself had opened for business. 6,000 seats. A choir that could make the deaf weep. A screen behind the altar so large that Pastor Daniel's face became the size of a billboard when he preached, which suited him perfectly, because Pastor Daniel had always believed his face deserved that kind of real estate. He was extraordinary in the pulpit. There was no honest way to say otherwise. When he preached, women fainted. When he prayed, men broke. When he lifted his hands and called down the fire, the air in the building changed in a way that even unbelievers could feel. There were documented testimonies of healings, of restored marriages, of cancers found and then not found, of prodigals who walked through those doors bitter and left weeping at the altar. The church had grown from 40 members in a rented hall to 6,000 in a cathedral under his leadership. His sermons went viral weekly. Millions of views. Comment sections flooded with "Man of God, pray for me." His name was mentioned in the same breath as the great preachers of the generation. He had written 2 books. He had traveled to 4 continents. He had been invited to pray at the inauguration of a sitting president. He was, by every visible measure, what God looked like in a suit. Brother Emmanuel, a deacon who had been at the church since the founding days, often said, "When Pastor Daniel prays, it is as if God leans closer to listen." Miriam, standing at the edge of those moments, had learned to smile at that. She had also learned that the God who leaned close to the prayers of Pastor Daniel at the pulpit had apparently never visited the parsonage on a Thursday night. Because on Thursday nights, when the cameras were off and the crowd was gone, Daniel Adeyemi became a man his congregation would not have recognized if he stood before them naked. Sister Temi was the first to notice that something was wrong with Mama Miriam. Temi was 24, newly married, and assigned to the women's ministry that Miriam led. She noticed things that others didn't, the way Mama Miriam always sat closest to the exit door during rehearsals, the way she laughed half a second after everyone else, as though she was watching laughter from a distance and deciding whether it was safe to join. The way she flinched sometimes when Pastor Daniel appeared unexpectedly in a doorway. Small things. The kinds of things that only register when you have lived them yourself. But Temi was young and new, and who was she to say anything about the pastor's wife? So she said nothing, and Miriam said nothing, and the church said nothing. And Daniel preached on Sunday about love being patient and kind, and the congregation wrote it in their journals, and the worship leader sang something gorgeous, and nobody in the building knew that the man at the microphone had told his wife that morning that she was intellectually beneath him and that God had been merciful to pair her with someone as gifted as he was. Miriam had stood at the kitchen sink when he said it, her hands in warm water, and she had felt something inside her grow very, very quiet. Not the quiet of peace. The quiet of a person who has been reduced too many times and has begun to believe the reduction. She prayed. She always prayed. She prayed on her knees at the side of the bed while Daniel slept, her forehead pressed to the duvet, her lips moving in silence. Lord, am I wrong? Am I what he says I am? Show me the truth. Show me the truth. Please God, show someone the truth. She had been praying this prayer for 4 years. She had not yet given up. But she was close. She was very, very close. The lipstick on the collar happened on a Wednesday. She had not been looking for it. She was not the kind of woman who searched pockets or checked phones, partly because she believed in trust and partly because she had learned early that in this house, the truth was a door Daniel kept locked and she was not given a key. But she had pulled his shirt from the laundry basket that Wednesday morning, and there it was. A half moon of coral-colored lipstick just below the collar point, half hidden by the fold. She stared at it for so long that her vision blurred. She set the shirt down. She walked to the bathroom. She sat on the edge of the tub for 11 minutes by the clock on the wall. Then she stood. She went back to the laundry. She soaked the shirt. She scrubbed the collar with the small brush she used for his cuffs. She removed the stain so completely that even she would not have been able to find it afterward. She ironed the shirt. She hung it in his closet. She closed the closet door. She went to the kitchen and made breakfast. When Daniel came downstairs and sat at the table and picked up his phone without looking at her, she set his plate in front of him and asked him how he wanted his eggs. "Scrambled," he said without looking up. "I preached 3 times last week. Do you know how much anointing that takes? I need protein." "I know," she said. She went back to the stove. And she whispered, so quietly that not even the walls could hear, "If this is your battle, Lord, then fight for me. Because I have nothing left." The night of the broken prayer happened on the second Friday of October. It was the night Pastor Daniel's 40-second miracle testimony went viral. A woman in the front row of his Thursday night service had been in a wheelchair for 9 years. When Daniel prayed, she stood. The video was 63 seconds long, and by Friday morning it had been viewed 8 million times. His face was everywhere. Hashtags, tributes, news articles. The comment sections looked like a revival. This man is carrying fire from heaven. The most anointed pastor alive. God is using this vessel. Miriam saw the notifications on her phone and felt something she was ashamed of. A dark, complicated grief that she could not fully name. She was glad for the woman who walked. But she lay on the floor of the bedroom. The actual floor, face down, cheek against the cold wood. And she cried with a kind of abandon she had never allowed herself before. She cried until the sound coming out of her didn't sound like crying anymore. Sounded like something tearing. "I can't," she whispered. "Lord, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot stand behind that man in front of that church and smile and be Mama Miriam, the blessed pastor's wife, when I am dying. I am dying. I am disappearing piece by piece and no one can see it and I don't know how to make anyone see it." She pressed her palms flat against the floor. "I am not asking you to destroy him. I am not asking for revenge. I am asking you, the God who sees in secret, to do what only you can do. If there is truth that needs to come out, let it come out. I cannot carry this hidden anymore. It is too heavy. Lord, it is too heavy." She lay there until she had nothing left to say. And then she lay there some more. The message came on a Monday evening, 10 days later. She almost didn't open it. It came from a number she didn't recognize, flagged as a church member but with no name attached. The message said only, "Mama Miriam, God told me to send you this. I am sorry for what you carry. You are not alone. Please listen." Beneath it was an audio file. She almost deleted it. Bam, she thought. Some strange congregant with an agenda. But something stopped her hand. The same stillness that had stopped her at the laundry basket. The quiet of a woman who had learned to pay attention to quiet. She put in her earphones. She pressed play. The voice on the recording was Daniel's. She would know that voice in the bottom of any ocean, in any darkness, in any language. It was unmistakably his. The cadence, the slight elevation on certain syllables, the way he said the word ministry with the weight of a man who believes he invented it. But this was not the pulpit voice. This was the parsonage voice. Thursday night voice. The voice with no audience. She listened for 4 minutes and 37 seconds. By the end of the first minute she was sitting. By the end of the second, she was gripping the edge of the table with both hands. By the third minute her mouth was open. By the fourth she was not breathing. She pulled out the earphones. She sat in the silence of the kitchen with the phone face down on the table. Outside, the evening prayer bell from the church down the street rang 3 times. She thought of Brother Elijah, the young man Daniel had been mentoring for 3 years. Daniel's spiritual son. His Timothy, he called the boy in sermons. 26 years old, gifted beyond measure. The one person in the church Daniel had publicly prophesied would carry the mantle after him. She thought about the things Daniel said about Elijah when no one was listening. She thought about what was on that recording. She pressed her hands together and lifted her eyes to the ceiling. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay, God. I see you." The day started like every other Sunday. 6,000 seats filled by 9:45 a.m. The choir had been rehearsing since 7. The ushers were pristine in their white and gold. The cameras were live-streaming to 300,000 viewers around the world. The screens behind the altar cycled through the church logo, the sermon title, the standard of holiness, and quotes from previous Sundays. Miriam sat in her seat in the second row, left side where she always sat. Near enough to be seen, far enough to breathe. She had not slept. She had spent the weekend making a decision that she hadn't actually needed to make, because the decision had already been made by someone else, someone who had listened to God in a way she hadn't expected. She had spent the weekend holding the knowledge of that audio recording like a coal in both hands, praying over it, weeping over it, asking God whether she was supposed to do something with it. God had said nothing, which meant she had come to understand that he had already done something. She watched Daniel ascend the platform to thunderous applause. She watched him lift his hands in that signature gesture, both arms wide, head tilted back, eyes closed, the one that the congregation had come to love, the one that showed up on the church merchandise. She watched 6,000 people rise to their feet for a man she had watched scrub a lipstick stain from his conscience and go to sleep in 20 minutes. He prayed. He always prayed beautifully. "Father God," his voice rolled across the building like weather, "we come before you unworthy, undeserving but covered by the blood. Let your holiness fall in this place. Let every hidden thing be brought to light. Let the truth of your word ring out in this building today." Miriam closed her eyes. Let every hidden thing be brought to light. She thought, "Be careful what you pray in public, Daniel." The sermon began at 10:22 a.m. He was in his element. He was always in his element up there. He moved across the platform like a man who had been born for it, and perhaps he had been. Perhaps the tragedy of Daniel Adeyemi was not that he lacked a calling, but that he had allowed the calling to become a costume. "Holiness is the standard," he declared, pointing at the ceiling. "God is not interested in your Sunday performance. He is interested in your Monday morning. He does not just see what you do in this building. He sees what you do in your house. He sees what you do in the dark. He sees the version of you that nobody else sees." The congregation erupted. "Come on, somebody, preach it. Fire. Fire. That's the word." He was building toward something. Miriam could feel it the way you feel a storm before the first drop falls. He was climbing sentence by sentence toward one of his famous climaxes, the kind that left people prostrate on the floor and left social media buzzing for days. And then the sound system stuttered. It was so brief that most people assumed they had imagined it. A half-second blip, the kind that happens when a cable shifts or a frequency interferes. The worship leader in the first row glanced toward the sound booth. The audio technician, a lanky 20-year-old named Kochi, looked down at his board with a frown. Everything seemed fine. Daniel kept preaching. And then it happened. Not a glitch. Not a blip. A full, unmistakable wall-to-wall broadcast of a man's voice through every speaker in the 6,000-seat cathedral. "Brother Chakuma, I need you to handle Elijah before he gets too popular. That boy is a threat. I don't care how you do it. Spread something, find something. I need him gone before convention." The building went still. It was the kind of stillness that falls over a room when something happens that the brain cannot immediately process. 6,000 people stopped breathing at the same moment. A woman in the third row dropped her Bible. A child who had been whispering to her mother went completely silent. The choir members on the risers looked at each other with wide eyes. 'Cause that voice. Every person in that building who had sat under the ministry of Pastor Daniel Adeyemi for more than 3 months recognized it instantly. Daniel stopped mid-sentence. His mouth stayed open. On the screens behind him, his face, magnified to the size of a wall, showed something that none of his congregation had ever seen before. Fear. The audio continued. 3 more minutes and 40 seconds of things that Pastor Daniel Adeyemi had said in private rooms, in hushed phone calls, in the back corridors of his own life. His voice confessing jealousy, confessing manipulation, confessing the name of the woman who was not his wife, confessing the money he had redirected, confessing the contempt he felt for the very people who rose to their feet for him every Sunday. The sound booth was in chaos. Kochi was pressing every button he could find, yanking cables, turning dials. But the audio played on, clean and clear and devastating, as if heaven itself had commandeered the system and had no intention of relinquishing it until it was done. There were screams. A woman in the back fainted. An elder in the front row pressed both hands over his mouth. Miriam sat completely still. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were open. She did not cry. She had already cried everything she had. She simply sat and breathed and let God do what she had prayed for on the floor of her bedroom on that October night. "If this is your battle, Lord, Fight for me. He was fighting. When the audio ended, the silence that followed was the loudest thing Miriam had ever heard. Daniel stood at the pulpit. He had not moved. He had not run. Perhaps he had understood, in some cellular spiritual way, that there was nowhere left to run to. He stood with his sermon notes in his hand and his perfect suit and his perfect teeth and his face. His large, magnified public face, and he looked like a man standing inside a verdict. Elder Amos walked to the platform first. He was 72 years old, had been in ministry for 40 of those years, had baptized Daniel himself when Daniel was a young man on fire. He walked slowly with his cane and climbed the 3 steps to the platform, and stood beside Daniel and did not say a word. He simply placed his hand on Daniel's shoulder. And Daniel broke. Not a crack. Not a split. Shattering. Total, complete, ugly, magnificent collapse. He went to his knees on the platform. Not the practiced kneeling of a man performing repentance, not the aesthetic surrender of a preacher who has choreographed brokenness, but the real thing. The kind that looks like a building coming down. His shoulders heaved. His hands went to his face. Sounds came out of him that were not language. 6,000 people watched. Nobody moved. And then something extraordinary happened, something that nobody planned for, something that became the moment that would be written about and spoken about for years afterward. A 17-year-old boy in the 4th row began to pray quietly, aloud but quietly, in tongues. And then the woman beside him joined him. And then the man behind her. And then the ripple moved outward row by row, until the entire building was filled with the sound of 6,000 people praying over a broken man on a platform, because that is what the church is supposed to do, even when it is the most difficult thing it has ever been asked to do. Miriam closed her eyes. She let the sound hold her. She felt something loosen in her chest. Not heal, it was far too soon for healing. But loosen. Like a knot that has been picked at for 4 years, finally giving way just enough to let blood flow through again. Thank you, she thought. Not to Daniel. Not to anyone in that room. Thank you. 3 days after that Sunday, at a quiet meeting in the church boardroom with only the senior elders and Miriam present, Elijah Okafor walked through the door. He was 26. Tall, with the kind of face that still looked surprised to be in adult rooms. He wore no jacket, just a plain white shirt, and he held a manila envelope in both hands the way you hold something you are not sure you should be holding. Elder Amos had asked him to come. Elijah set the envelope on the table and looked at the elders, and then he looked at Miriam, and something in his expression, something too old for his face, made her hands go still. I need to tell you how the recording happened, he said. The room was quiet. Pastor Daniel planned to destroy me. His voice did not waver. Not from bitterness, but from the particular steadiness of someone who has already done all their falling apart in private and arrived at acceptance. I found out 3 months ago. I don't need to go into all the details. What matters is that I made a choice about how to respond. He looked at his hands. I was angry at first. I want to be honest about that. I was very angry. I had given 3 years of my life to this ministry. I believed in him. I loved him the way you love a father. He paused. And I wanted to expose him out of that anger. I want to be honest about that too. He looked up. But God stopped me. I went to pray about it, really pray. Not the kind of praying where you've already decided what you're going to do and you're just asking God to agree with you, but the real kind, where you get quiet enough to actually listen. And God said something that I didn't want to hear. An elder leaned forward. What did he say? Elijah was quiet for a moment. He said, "This is not about you." He said, "There is a woman in that house who has been praying on the floor of her bedroom, and she is about to give up. And I have heard her. And I need you to be the answer to a prayer you don't even know was prayed." The room was absolutely silent. Miriam pressed her hand to her mouth. I didn't know what that meant, Elijah continued. I spent 6 more weeks doing nothing. And then I heard something in the corridor, something I wasn't meant to hear, and I realized the recording already existed. It had been made accidentally during a voice memo that ran too long on someone's phone during a meeting. The person who made it didn't know what to do with it. They were afraid. They brought it to me. He opened the envelope and placed a single sheet of paper on the table, a written account of the chain of custody of the recording, signed and dated. I sent it to Mama Miriam first. Because God said she needed to know she wasn't alone before anything else happened. And then I prayed for 2 more weeks about the rest. I wasn't going to do anything with it. I was going to let God decide. He paused. I still don't know how it got into the sound system. I did not put it there. I need you to know that. Kachi said he found an unlabeled file in the system's playlist folder on Saturday evening. He assumed it was a testimony clip that the media team had uploaded, and he cleared it for playback. He didn't listen to it in advance. Elijah looked at each person at the table. I did not do that, he said. I don't know who did. Maybe nobody did. The elders exchanged a long look. Elder Amos folded his hands and looked at the ceiling. Miriam looked at Elijah, this young man who had been handed a weapon and had chosen to hold it rather than use it, who had been wronged and had chosen to be an answer to prayer rather than an instrument of revenge, who had looked into the face of his own destruction and decided it was not his story to tell. She stood up slowly. She walked around the table. Elijah stood. She put her arms around him and held him the way mothers hold sons who have done something costly and right, and she said nothing, because there was nothing adequate to say. And he let her hold him because he was 26 and he had been praying alone for months and carrying something no one his age should have to carry. And even the strongest of God's instruments need someone to hold them sometimes. In the corner, Elder Amos quietly pressed his handkerchief to his eyes. Daniel did not preach again for 16 months. The elders suspended him formally within 48 hours of that Sunday. The statement they released was brief and careful and more merciful than many felt he deserved. It said that Pastor Daniel Adeyemi had been placed on indefinite leave pending a full investigation, that the church leadership was committed to both truth and redemption, and that they requested privacy for all families involved. The press was not interested in privacy. For 6 weeks, Redemption Cathedral was the top story in every religious news outlet in the country. Opinion pieces were written. Podcasts debated. The viral miracle videos were reposted with new, bitter captions. Former members came forward with accounts that had been buried for years. The comment sections, the same ones that had said, "This man carries fire from heaven," became something else entirely. Miriam read none of it. She had asked Temi to manage her phone notifications, and Temi had done so with the protectiveness of someone who had been waiting for permission to finally, truly help. Daniel entered a residential counseling program run by a network of senior pastors who specialized in the rehabilitation of ministry leaders. He was not coddled there. The men who received him had seen every variety of ecclesiastical collapse, and they loved him enough to tell him every hard thing. He called Miriam from there after 3 weeks. She answered but barely spoke. He spoke for a long time. He cried. She listened. After he hung up, she sat with the phone in her hand and let herself feel everything. The grief and the anger and the complicated, inconvenient thing underneath both of them that she did not have a clean word for yet. It was not forgiveness, not fully, not yet. But it was something. A sliver of openness. A door left slightly ajar. She was not going to make any decisions about her marriage yet. She had said this to the elders, and they had respected it. She was going to take the space that had been denied her for 4 years, and she was going to heal, and she was going to find out who Miriam was when nobody was asking her to perform. She started with small things. She bought paint, a warm yellow, and repainted the kitchen herself on a Saturday afternoon while Temi sat on the counter eating crackers and talking about nothing in particular. She joined a prayer group that met at dawn, not because she was the pastor's wife and it was expected, but because she wanted to, and discovering the difference between those two things was its own quiet revolution. She started writing. Not for publication, not for anyone. Just long, rambling, honest paragraphs in a spiral notebook that she kept under her bed. The first entry was 3 pages long and said everything she had never been allowed to say out loud. She cried writing it. The second entry was shorter. The 10th entry had a section that made her laugh. Genuinely laugh, not the half-second delayed kind, but the real kind that starts in the belly and takes you by surprise. She hadn't heard that laugh in so long she almost didn't recognize it. The church took longer to heal. Churches always do. Congregations are not monolithic. And the response to what happened at Redemption Cathedral fell along the lines that such responses always fall. Some left and never came back. Not because they had lost faith in God, but because they needed to find God somewhere that didn't carry the specific weight of that building, and there was no judgment in that. Some stayed and were furious and said furious things in the parking lot for many weeks. Some stayed and were tender and showed up every Sunday and held the broken thing together with the supernatural stubbornness that faith produces in ordinary people. Elder Amos led the congregation through the interim period with the authority of a man who has earned it and the humility of a man who knows what earned it. He preached simpler sermons than Daniel's, shorter, quieter, less spectacular. But something in the building began to breathe differently, as if the elaborate machinery of performance had been removed and underneath it, finally, there was just a gathering of people who needed God and said so. Elijah stayed. Some had expected him to leave, to take what had happened and use it to launch somewhere else. He didn't. He taught a small Wednesday night Bible study to about 60 members. No cameras, no live stream, nothing viral. Just the text and honest questions and long silences that nobody tried to fill. People left those Wednesday nights changed in a way that was harder to describe than a miracle video but somehow more durable. Temi told Miriam about those Bible studies one evening, and Miriam listened and felt the uncomplicated pleasure of watching something true take root. Daniel came home after 16 months. He was a different configuration of himself. Not unrecognizable. He was still broad-shouldered, still handsome in that specific way, still capable of filling a room with his presence. But something in the way he held his body had changed. Something had been removed, or perhaps something had been restored. It was difficult to tell from the outside whether a man has been emptied of his ego or filled with something more honest, and perhaps there is no difference. He came home on a Thursday. Not a Sunday. Not a moment of public spectacle. Just a Thursday afternoon, a cab in the driveway, a suitcase on the step. Miriam answered the door. They stood and looked at each other for a long time. "I don't know what happens now," he said. "Neither do I," she said. "I am not asking you to trust me," he said. "I know what I broke. I know that trust is not a door you unlock by saying sorry. I know it is built. I know it takes time. I am not asking for anything today except to know if you are willing to let me try." Miriam looked at him. At this man who had made her small and made her afraid and made her cry on the floor of the bedroom while thousands of people chanted his name, and who had also, she knew this in the complicated way she knew most things now, been running from something in himself for so long that he had destroyed everything he touched in the running. She thought about the yellow kitchen, the spiral notebook, the dawn prayer group, the sound of her own Real laugh. She was not who she had been. She stepped back from the door. "Come inside," she said. He picked up his suitcase. He crossed the threshold. He did not presume to touch her. He set his bag down in the hallway and looked at the yellow kitchen, and something moved across his face. Recognition, perhaps. The recognition that life had gone on without him, and that the life it had become was actually more honest than the one he had presided over. "You repainted," he said. "I did," she said. He nodded slowly. "It's beautiful." They ate dinner at the kitchen table that night, the yellow walls warm in the lamplight, two people beginning the long and unglamorous work of finding out whether there was something worth saving and whether they were brave enough to do the saving. There were long silences. There were careful words. There was one moment when Daniel put down his fork and said, "I am so sorry, Miriam," and his face did the thing faces do when a man has finally, actually, arrived at the thing he is sorry for, and she looked at him and simply said, "I know." Not "it's okay." 'Cause it was not okay. Not "I forgive you." Because she was not there yet and would not pretend to be. Just "I know." And somehow, between the two of them in that yellow kitchen on a Thursday night, that was enough to begin. The following Sunday, Elijah preached at Redemption Cathedral for the first time. He was so nervous before the service that Temi found him in the prayer room with his head between his knees, breathing slowly. "What if I'm terrible?" he said. "You might be," said Temi. "That's okay. God is still God." He laughed. He stood. He straightened his collar. He walked to the platform. He stood at the microphone that had once held the voice of a man performing holiness, and he opened his mouth, and what came out was something so ordinary and so completely real that it stopped the room in its tracks. He said, "I am not who Pastor Daniel said I would be. I am not the next great anointed leader of the generation. I am a 26-year-old man who made a lot of mistakes in the last 2 years and who has had to learn, the very hard way, the difference between the anointing and the ego. And this morning I want to talk to you about that difference. 'Cause I think most of us in this room have forgotten it. I know I had." 6,000 people leaned forward. He had them before the third sentence. Not because he was spectacular. 'Cause he was true. There is a difference. There will always be a difference. The last thing that was written in Miriam's spiral notebook, sometime in the spring of the following year, on a morning when the kitchen was warm and the birds were doing something cheerful outside the window, was this: "I used to think holiness was a performance. I watched it performed for years. I ironed the costume and smiled in the front row and believed, or tried to believe, that the performance was real because the stage was so convincing. I know now that holiness is not a sermon. It is not a viral video or a miracle testimony or a 6,000-seat cathedral or a man who moves like he was born to stand in front of crowds. Holiness is what you are on a Thursday night in the kitchen when nobody is watching. Holiness is the boy who holds the weapon and chooses not to use it. Holiness is the woman who paints the kitchen yellow because she is relearning what she likes. Holiness is two people at a table in the lamplight, saying hard true things, not because it is comfortable but because they have decided that truth is worth more than comfort. Holiness is a life. Just a life. Nothing more. Nothing less. Just a life that looks the same in the light as it does in the dark. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." Luke 8 verse 17 Sonnet 4.6 extended.